So I run a personal finance blog called brokeGIRLrich, and over the past few years of running it, I've become a pretty strong financial literacy advocate because I think our financial literacy, especially in the United States, is lacking. And so also that's another little disclaimer there, is that I'm American, so you're about to hear some very American-centric personal finance tips. Also, I'm just a financial literacy advocate, so it's something I'm really passionate about, but I'm not like a CPA, an accountant, or certified financial planner. So with that being said, I'd like to give you one little piece of advice. Whenever you come across financial information from anyone, it's just use what you can and leave what you can't. And I sort of think of it as like, I come to the arts through stage management, and we have stage management kits. For me, personal finance is a little bit like everything I learn goes into my personal finance kit, and I just use what I can and leave what I can't. So to get started, I think a lot of money comes down to our mentality. And recently I've been reading this really cool book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's about cognitive behavioral science and how we think about things. So I thought we could maybe start with a little experiment based on what I've been reading. It's definitely of questionable scientific merit. You guys are the first ones helping me run this ever. So we might totally fail, but we're going to give it a try anyway. What I want to do is split us into two groups. So if your first name begins with an A to an L, you'll be group 1. And if your first name begins with an M to a Z, you'll be group 2. In a second, I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes, and then I'm going to ask group 1 to open them, read something to yourselves, and think about it. And then I'll ask you, group 1, to close your eyes again, and then we'll do the same thing with group 2. And then I'm going to ask you all to put something in the chat box at the end of this little experiment. So in case you haven't checked it out yet, there's probably a little button that says chat. So make sure you can see your chat box right now. All right. So all groups, close your eyes. Group 1, which is first names A to L. Open your eyes and read what you see on the screen. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. All right, group 1, close your eyes. Group 2, that's first names M to Z. Open your eyes. I'll give you guys about 10 seconds. All right, group 2, close your eyes. And I'm going to give you all about 10 more seconds to think about the questions you read. And then when you're ready, open your eyes and just read what's on the screen and answer it in the chat. Don't spend a lot of time trying to overthink it. Ooh, lots of answers. Thanks everyone for like playing along. All right, so the idea behind this is based on, there are two big effects in the book that I was reading that I think really influence how we think and how it applies as well to money, right? So what we were doing here was a little test called the availability heuristic. And that's based on the number of instances you can retrieve in your mind and how easy they come to mind, right? So if you were in the group, and also so everyone knows, group 1 was asked, think of 3 times in which you behaved assertively, and group 2 was told to think of 3 times that you didn't behave assertively, right? So by priming your mind with these instances, even if you were told of 3 times that you could think of, sorry, then I'll put the name of the book is Thinking Fast and Slow. So, which was a question in the chat. Totally lost my train of thought there. Maybe I won't read the chat so much. Sorry, I'll come back to your questions later.
You were talking about the questions.
Yes, and why we were doing them.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones who were primed to think of times you were assertive, even if you're not as assertive, if you could think of 3 times, it probably pushed your number up higher, right? And the ones who were told to think of times when you were not assertive, even if you are assertive, it might have pushed your number down a little lower. So after we're totally done here, I'm going to take all these numbers and get them from Anna and figure out whether or not the average is lower and higher and whether or not this experiment actually works, because you all were my guinea pigs to try this for the first time. So if you're curious about whether or not it worked, you can follow me on Twitter at brokeGIRLrich, and I will put the answers there afterwards. But the reason this matters for money is that so often we hear that, you know, the starving artist mentality, like the pictures I even put up here, like my first favorite musical, I know it's super cliche, but I'm also the right age, was Rent, and I loved it. And I thought, who wouldn't want to like live this crazy bohemian life? But now in my mid-30s, I actually feel a lot for Benny and think, probably he just wanted his rent paid. And really, there's a balance here. We don't all need to starve to death, you know? Or Moulin Rouge, where the bohemians are so cool, but also so broke, right? Like, you very infrequently hear, like, oh, of course, go into the arts, you'll make good money. I know personally my parents were kind of horrified, right? And then they got over it because I do actually like manage to pay all my bills. But when we think about how much money we should make and how much we should even think and talk about money as people in the arts, I think that our availability heuristic, what we've been like ingrained to know, is that we don't talk about it and that we shouldn't expect much. Another effect from this book that I thought was really interesting is the anchoring effect, and it occurs when people consider a particular value for an unknown quantity before estimating that quantity. And the reason I thought it was really interesting is that I think when we don't see how much we're getting paid, especially like on a job post, I think we anchor ourselves kind of lower than it needs to be, even though I think we all agree they should put how much they're paying you on the job post. But that's not always what happens. And I think that our habit is to like push everything down and think less and to sort of ignore the money side of things. And if that's not you, fantastic. But if that is you, I would encourage you today to sort of spend a little bit of time thinking about like myths and your cultural standing as like money and an artist, and think about whether or not really that even should be how we think about things, or if these things are just nonsense and we should spend more time actually caring about our finances. There's nothing wrong with that. And part of the reason that I became a financial literacy advocate is because, like, in the US, we are kind of a hot mess about money generally. So I gathered together a bunch of different statistics that I thought were really interesting, but 53% of adults are financially anxious. And if you're wondering where they come from, all the sources are at the bottom. 2 in 3 families lack an emergency fund. 78% of adults live paycheck to paycheck. 3 in 5 adults don't keep a budget. 4 in 5 youths failed a financial literacy quiz. And I think that that's a key thing for me, is to know that like it starts so young that we don't learn these things. And along the same lines, 27 states scored a C, D, or F for high school financial literacy. And I know personally in high school, I never took a finance class. I didn't take one in college either. I would actually be really curious if any of you did, if you put in the chat, because I feel like it's probably not going to be that many of you who've actually taken like a financial class. 54% of millennials are concerned about student loans. And I'm sure that that includes Gen Z these days too, because you guys are getting older as well. 60% of adults have credit card debt in the past year, which I bet this is also from before the pandemic. I'm betting all of these numbers are much higher right now, right? Because the pandemic has been a hot mess. 4 in 5 adults experience barriers to homeownership, and fewer than 1 in 5 adults is confident in savings. And I think so many of these numbers come back to the fact that our financial literacy and what we know about finances is so not good. I'd also be curious, like, if some of you are joining us from outside the US, if this is totally normal in your countries and you feel like you were not like given a proper financial background, or if your country is actually nailing it. I'd like to know if there are any countries like that. So today, to get us started, I want to cover 3 basic concepts. We're going to talk about how to know where you are, how to know where you want to go, and then spending less and earning more to try to reach some of these goals. And we're going to start with know where you are. So to me, knowing where you are boils down to really 2 key tools that you can use. And one is a net worth statement. So a net worth statement is where you figure out what all your assets are, which is everything that makes you money. So like a checking account and a savings account. If you have any investments, your retirement account, some people include their houses there, or even your car, as long as you're making sure you put how much it would actually be worth if you sold it today. And then you subtract your liabilities. So, you know, any credit card debt, a mortgage you may have, student loans, things like that. And from that, you get your net worth, which is pretty much the financial number that you are worth right now, but just also like a friendly psychological reminder, you are not your net worth. Like it's just a number and it's just a tool to use to improve it. It's really a snapshot in time, which is why I put that little camera there. And there are different ways you can do it. So personally, I use this Excel sheet that's up there right now. And I've been using it for 8 years and I haven't even had to like make any changes over time. A net worth worksheet is like really a pretty simple thing. Once you set it up once, you can use it for quite a while. And I would advocate for using an Excel sheet and doing it manually the first few times, because I think that helps you really get in the mindset. Whereas if you use some of these automated programs I'm going to show you, you don't necessarily see all of the steps for how you get your assets and how your liabilities are broken down. So if you like Excel sheets, you are welcome to download this one for free off of my website, brokeGIRLrich, or you can just Google net worth Excel sheets and you will find more than you can even count, because pretty much everyone who runs a finance blog has one out there that they've made. But if you know you are not the type to sit down and deal with an Excel sheet, that's fine, because we're all different. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a stage manager, so I love Excel sheets. You might not be the same. Mint and Personal Capital, I'm going to put a link to both of them in the chat. These are, they both go? They did, okay. These are two really great programs that can automate your net worth calculations for you. So pretty much you sign up, they're both free. Personal Capital will try to advertise a lot of things to you, but it's still free. And you link all of your different bank accounts. It's supposedly as secure as a bank is, and I have accounts at both of them and have, knock on wood, not had any issues. And from there, it will calculate your net worth for you. So instead of you having to do it every month, if you just spend an hour or two putting all of your accounts in there, you can check it in like 30 seconds every month. So again, I would advocate using an Excel sheet and doing it for the very first time, at least step by step on your own, so you totally get the full experience of understanding what a net worth calculation is. But then you can use Mint or Personal Capital to help you stay on top too. So a net worth is that it's your snapshot of where you are at this moment, right? So, and really it's handy for tracking over time. And personally, I found my net worth statements were most useful when I was paying off student loans, and it felt like my money was just disappearing and I was achieving nothing, right? And my bank account was just always sad. On the plus side, when I would do a net worth statement every month, I do them at the end of the month to just double check where things are. I could actually see that some difference was occurring and that all of my debts were slowly creeping down, which makes your net worth creep up, which can be really motivating. All right, our other tool for knowing where you are right now are budgets, which I know like the word budget in and of itself sort of just makes some people shut down. I will even level with you. I hate budgets, but they're really useful. And they do help you get better control of your money instead of your money controlling you, which is really like the whole goal of personal finance. So for that, I'm really grateful that budgets exist, right? So if you have a steady income, if you're like really fortunate to have a resident job somewhere, if you take your last 1 to 2 months of expenses and just go through and make like a little sheet and categorize them based on, you know, housing, utilities, food, entertainment, so that you can get the sum total that you're spending each month. And then just make a list of your categories and you'll have a general idea of where your spending is right now to base your budget off of that. If you have a variable income, it's better to go back 3 to 6 months and do an average of that, and possibly even longer, because really no one knows your budgets or your lifestyle better than you. So you might know that there's some really big like dips and peaks at different times, and you may want to do a whole year to really get the most accurate picture. The further back you're willing to go, the more accurate the picture is going to be anyway. So same thing, you just make the categories and then figure out what your monthly average is for those amounts, right? And then a second step, I think, when you're setting up your budgets for the first time is to sort of note a difference between your needs and what your wants are, just so that you have an idea of it. You don't even have to make any decisions yet, because so much of personal finance is just gathering data and making sure that you know where your money is going so that you can make conscious decisions about your spending habits. Sorry, my notes are up on my second screen, so I just want to make sure that I actually covered everything. on this? Yes. Right. So once you've amassed this data from your past spending habits, and if you're a heavy cash user, you may have to decide today, like, oh, I'm going to start tracking this so I can make a budget in a couple months. And then just keep a hold of your receipts, and you can do the same thing that most of us can probably look at credit card statements and do. Then you're going to set up a monthly budget, right? Same thing. You can use Excel, and just like the sheet that I have here, figure out what the amount you need to save each month is, when it's due, and how you'll pay it. So most people generally would use the checking or savings account to pay them, but it's also useful to track your income that's coming in, and some of us have more than one source, and if any of them are steady, let's assume they're steady in this first iteration here. You can put that income one is $3,000 a month from your main job, and income two is $500 a month that you make from bartending one night a week, right? So you can plan for all of that across the top and know where your money's coming from to pay each of the bills, right? This is called a line item budget, and it's sort of what I think people think of when they think of budgets initially, and that's because I feel it's the most comprehensive, right? And if you don't know where you've been spending your money, honestly, the best way to find out and to get back on top of things is to just sit down and fill out one of these sheets, because you can see where you're spending too much or where you have extra to spare maybe, and this will give you the clearest record of that. If your income varies, or you work freelance and it's all over the place, maybe don't worry too much about like where income one and income two are, and you'll just probably over time move more into paying things out of savings, especially when your income goes up and down so much. But you'll know how much you need to save in the different months too, which is really helpful. So line item budgets are pretty easy to create, and they're very detailed, and they're going to give you the clearest picture of where your money is going. But they can make tracking irregular expenses a little bit more difficult. So personally, I know for the longest time, I forgot that I had to buy contacts every year, which is a pretty big expense. And every summer I would get to the point where I had to buy them again, and suddenly I needed to come up with $500 extra, right? You would think I'd get smarter, but I did this several years in a row. So a key thing when you're looking back, even if you look back 1 to 2 months with a steady job, you may want to just sort of peruse even further back and look for your one-time expenses and where they stand out and if they hit at the same time every year. Because then you can divide and save a little bit towards them instead of coming up, like suddenly having to come up with $500. And you can see that most monthly budget breakdowns will have like an occasional section that you can use to plan for that. But maybe there's no way you're going to tackle an Excel sheet like this, or you've done it before and you hate it. There are actually other ways that you can budget as well. So you can do a proportional budget where you just sort of aim to keep things within a percentage goal. So like a pretty common one that I want to say was popularized by Elizabeth Warren actually is needs, wants, savings, which means you keep all your needs, so your housing, your utilities, like your health insurance, to 50% of what you make. And then you spend 30% on your wants, and 20% should go into savings, which is much simpler. But I think that if like so many of us, you've sort of just been coasting through and not paying too much attention to your finances, really breaking it down line by line and knowing where your money is going to be much more useful. Also, as another point, you don't have to do this like every month for the rest of your life, you know? You can just use it when you're making big life changes. I know I used it for a few months when I was starting to get my finances in order. And now most of the time I just check my net worth statement at the end of the month and I'm like, oh, everything's fine. Or I'm like, oh, no, everything's not fine. Fix something next month. But yeah, and then I bring it out again when I have big life changes. So for instance, I work out on tour a lot, which means that sometimes all my stuff is just at my parents' and I don't have to pay rent. Then I come home from tour and get a job somewhere and have to pay rent. That's a pretty big difference in how I'm handling my finances. So I'll sit down and work out a budget again for when things change. Also, as a reminder of that, budgets are living things. So like the net worth we talked about is a snapshot in a moment. You do it, it's done. You don't really have to worry about it again until next month. But your budget might take a couple of tries to get right. So the first time when you write down everything based on your research of what you're already spending, you might find that you are in the green and it's totally fine and you don't have to make any other changes. But you may find that you're falling short and you need to adjust things in different places to make things work, and you decide you're just barely going to eat out next month And at the end of the month, you find that was totally unrealistic. And no matter how much money you make, you're going to still eat out a lot. So you need to find different places to make cuts and changes. And I think that's totally normal. And we don't really talk much about how it's okay to like take a couple tries to get your budget right. It's not like a one and done thing. It should just, it needs to adjust over time. So keep that in mind. And let me just share this quick link here. I found this fantastic article recently from another personal finance blogger. And it's all of their budget categories, and it is super comprehensive. And if I had read something like that before I made my first budget, it would have saved me from forgetting that I had $500 of contact expenses to pay for. But if you are going to work on setting up a budget after we're done here today, I totally recommend that you check out that article and just read through all of the different categories and see if any of them apply to you. And a final thought on this, because so many of us are freelancers, like I mentioned earlier, splitting things between your needs and your wants, it's very handy to have two different budgets in mind. You've got your budget for when everything's going fine, and then it's great to have a bare bones budget so that you know the absolute bare minimum that you have to make every month to continue to get by. And hopefully you don't have to live on that one very often, but just knowing what it is can be pretty helpful when times are pretty tight. A few tips that I use as someone who often does have variable income is that when I'm unsure about things, which definitely happens, especially in your first few steps of learning how to budget, if I'm guessing, I always round up for expenses and round down on income and try to make things work with those numbers. As I mentioned before, you should average your income from as many months as you can to create your baseline. Another trick that has kind of helped me is just, I started my career out on cruise ships, and when they give you your contract on cruise ships, they tell you what your daily rate is. So before I really knew much at all about money, in my head, I knew I was like making $90 a day. So all my expenses for that day had to be less than $90. And as long as they were, I was doing fine. And I find that when my pay fluctuates a lot, it's sort of helpful for me to break it down to like what my daily rate is and sort of adjust at times to match that, right? But then if you're paying rent, you sort of, I would say, look at your needs as well and always know what your daily rate on those are if you're going to use this system too. So for instance, at my last job, I realized my daily rate was like sort of around $90 again, but my expenses were around $50, which left me at $40 a day to achieve all of my other goals. And it's funny how fast that goes. Like if you fill up a tank of gas and you buy like lunch, it's gone. And I think that really helped give me some perspective at times, especially right when I was right in the beginning of changes of income. And another really helpful thing can be to build buffers or to use bucket budgeting, which is where you set up a lot of different savings accounts and sort of just funnel money into that rather than leaving everything in your checking account. Because I think sometimes out of sight, out of mind can be really helpful. So for instance, to fix that contacts issue that I mentioned before, I set up a separate savings account that was for contacts, and I just funnel like $20 a month or whatever the math is on that to get there every year. And when I need the money, I know that's sitting over in the contact bucket. At the same time, say a pandemic hit and totally wiped out all of my work opportunities and all of my money, I might decide that I'm wearing glasses for a year and now I have like $500 more for essentials. And in that way, it becomes more like buckets that you can take from in an emergency. And one more just key tip is consider your emergency account a necessary expense. If you want to be like fully freelance and have income all over the place coming in at all different times, when you work on your budget, just an emergency savings account is a really necessary thing. If this year has taught us nothing, I think that's it. But we'll talk a little bit more about emergency savings accounts in a minute here. So just as a final reminder on the know where you are, the two key tools that you can use to do this are to create net worth statements and to work on a budget. And your net worth statement is a snapshot in time that you can use to track progress. And a budget is sort of a daily tool that you can use, and it should change over time. I use Capital One too, actually. Capital One does have a very good high yield savings account. That's where my emergency fund is. Okay, so which is a comment in the chat that I'm responding to. So our next concept is, now that you know where you are, which is really has to be the first step, you need to think about where you want to go. And this is so funny, but I don't think we talk about this enough, is that you can't possibly know where you want to go unless you actually sit down and set some goals, right? Sorry, let me move my nets ahead to where we are. Great. So I would encourage you that like today, if you want to set up like set up a net worth statement and get started on your budget, I would also recommend that you just take like 10 minutes and sit down and write what your goals are. Like, I want to be able to pay for emergencies if they happen. I have this much debt and I'd like to pay it down in this much time, right? I do want to retire someday. And especially if you're American and we don't have many social safety nets, you want to consider how you can get there. Maybe you want to buy a house, maybe you want to go back to school, or maybe you have children and you want to help fund school for them. Maybe traveling is a big goal. Maybe you want to be able to contribute to charity. Whatever it is, just sit down and think as focused as you can about what your money goals for your life are, right? And I don't know if any of you have heard of SMART goals, but they're a pretty good system for developing goals. And this post here is a really good explanation of how you can set SMART goals, which pretty much just mean very clear with set numbers. So as opposed to like, I'd like to be able to weather emergency, a better goal would be if you have no emergency savings, I want to have $100 saved for emergencies within 2 months, right? It's very easy to know whether or not you've actually achieved the goal or not then, because it's very clear. And also some of your goals might be, I want to be able to retire, but I don't know how, so I'm going to spend 2 hours researching retirement strategies this week, is also a SMART goal. Right, so let's talk about those emergency savings accounts now, right? Set them up. I highly recommend that we keep them separate from checking, because out of sight, out of mind is real. I use 2 different banks for different savings. My emergency savings is over at Capital One, and they do have a pretty good savings rate, but Barclays Bank is where I keep all of my, like, that contacts fund and the money that I use pretty often, but I just want to keep out of sight sometimes. They actually have a slightly higher savings rate right now, so I'm going to recommend them if you're looking for a new bank. Barclays Bank is at 0.40%, and usually, I mean, that's really not much anyway, so you're not going to make a lot of interest in your emergency savings. The idea is that it's liquid and it's there for you if you need it. American savings rates are not so hot right now. And then once you've picked a bank, set your goals, right? So if you're at nothing right now and saving anything for an emergency savings seems almost impossible, $100 is better than nothing, right? If you've got 100, aim for 1,000. If you've got 1,000, aim for a month. So using that budget information that you came up with back there, you have an idea of what you need to save up for a month. So make that your next goal. And then honestly, like 3 to 6 months is what conventional wisdom seems to say. A lot of financial experts advocate that being a pretty good emergency savings fund. I know that I'm aiming for a whole year. And before the pandemic, I know a lot of people kind of, when I would talk about personal finance and emergency savings, would say that I was being a little excessive about a year, but I feel like that gives me so much freedom in a lot of my like work decisions and everything too. And now that the pandemic has hit, no one really seems to make fun of the fact that I think I need a year's savings there, which I'm nowhere near yet. And that's 8 years now into savings, but that's just to point out that it takes a while to build up emergency savings, and it's a goal that can take you a very long time. But I noticed that after I got over like 1,000, there was like this instant like stress relief. Like $1,000 really can fix a lot of problems. So I would highly encourage you to work on your emergency savings account, because it gives you just such a sense of peace as well. But it's a marathon, not a sprint. And especially at the beginning, as I recall, like I would hit a little goal and be like, yeah, $500, and I would hit like a pothole and need new tires the next day. It's almost inevitable. So like, don't get discouraged. It's a very long path, but so worth it. And like I was just saying, as a freelancer, I feel like a year is a better goal. And then actually, I just want to share a few links with you. So this is a pretty cool calculator that I'm putting in there that can help you figure out different savings rates. So if you're not sure how much saving a couple dollars every month would really add up to over time, you can play with that calculator and it will, that's weird. If you copy it, make sure you catch the end, because the end didn't turn into a hyperlink for some reason. But anyway, I really like different calculators at times, because especially when money is really tight, once in a while it's like, does this $10 really matter? Like I could use this $10 for something else. And I find the calculators kind of motivating, how over time a little bit does add up. And then at the bottom here, I have this thing called Dobot, and I'm going to put in a link to that as well. Dobot is just like, I think it's the greatest little tool. If no one has ever mentioned it to you, it's an automatic savings app, right? And you link it to your checking account, and it has this algorithm, and it trolls like how you spend money a little bit. And then it goes, I'm just going to take $2 here and $3 here and $5 here over the course of the month. And it puts it into a little savings account for you. There was another app that was a lot like this, and it's called Digit. Digit costs $1 or $2 every month. Dobot is free. It's owned by a bank. So they are probably making interest off of your little savings there until you transfer it to wherever you want it to go. So personally, when I was using Digit and Dobot to test them out for about 2 years, I saved almost $2,000 on like tiny little draws at a time, barely even noticing it. They also have a disclaimer that if they ever cause your bank to overdraft, they will pay the overdraft fee and fix everything for you. But I honestly had some very crazy variable income when I was testing it, and I fully expected them to like overdraft it a couple times. I even did that on purpose to test it, and they didn't. It never happened. Oh, cool. So also maybe, thanks, Rebecca. See Rebecca's comment in there. You can also check to see if your bank has something equivalent as well. But if your bank doesn't, you can check out Dobot. And you don't have to use it for emergency savings. You can use it for really any of your savings goals. I just think, personally, I do use it for emergency savings and think it's pretty great for that. And every time it hits $100 in my Dobot account, I transfer it into my emergency savings account. And I'm just going to quickly talk about health savings accounts a little bit because I think they're amazing. They come in 3 different types: just a savings account, just an investing account, or a combination account. And it's pretty much like if an emergency fund and a retirement account had a baby, it would be a health savings account. I'm pretty sure Americans are the only ones who have access to this. Sorry, y'all. But for 2021, if you're an individual, you can put in up to $3,600 on it as long as you have an account that qualifies. I'm just going to drop another link in here because I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about HSAs when they don't apply to everyone. But if you're intrigued, there's a why is this doing this weird thing to my links? Make sure you copy the whole link again in that case, but that's a very detailed breakdown. So if you're intrigued and you want to learn more about whether or not you can qualify, you can read that there. But essentially, if you have a high deductible healthcare plan, you can sign up for an HSA for the most part. Just make sure that it's not too high, because some insurance plans are actually, the deductible is so high that it doesn't even count as for a health savings account anymore. And that your out of pocket is the right amount too. But the reason that this is so good is because you can use it you get the tax benefit. So if you made $40,000, if you put $3,600 into your health savings account, you only get taxed on, oh my goodness, math, $36,400 this year. So you get that tax break. But also, if you are a person who has a lot of like health issues, you can use this money to then pay for those health issues all year, and they'll overall cost slightly less because of the tax break. But if you're fortunate and you are not a person with a lot of health issues, you can use this as an emergency savings account, because at any time in the future, you can take out the amount of money that you've used on qualified expenses. And qualified expenses, you can find a list also in that post that I put up there. But they're very broad. So like, for instance, those contacts that I talk about, I could pay for them every year out of this account, or I can just save that receipt, and anytime in the future, I could take $500 out by submitting the receipt with no penalties. So it's kind of an amazing emergency savings option, an initial one that gets some tax benefits, right? Some places you can look if you're interested. Mine is at Old National Bank and the HSA Authority, but Lively, HSA, and Fidelity also have pretty good ones. And just a reminder that make sure you're opening the kind that you want. So if you know you have a ton of healthcare expenses and that you plan to use this to pay for them, then you might only use one that's a savings account. If you know you have like no healthcare expenses and you're hoping to use this as a future like retirement account and to let interest grow, then you can just open the investment account type. And if you're not sure, you can open a combo type, which is what I have too, because I like the idea that it could be an easier emergency savings, and leaving some of that in the savings half and then moving everything else into the investment half, so that I'm getting much higher interest rates on my money that's just sitting there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about debts in case you were trying to sort out how to deal with your debts. So there are two systems that you can use to tackle them. The one that you might have heard most often is called a snowball, which is where you take all of your balances and you line them up from the lowest balance to the highest balance. And once you pay off the lowest, and you throw whatever extra you can possibly find at your lowest balance. And as soon as the lowest is paid off, you move to the next lowest using the amount that you were using to pay the lowest plus anything extra. And this creates a snowball over time so that hopefully you have the most money to throw at your biggest balance by the end. And then there's an avalanche method where you line them up from the highest to lowest interest, which will actually save you the most money in the long run. But there's something to be said for like the motivation that you get of feeling all of your smaller debts disappear and being able to throw more and more money over time from the snowball. But either one is a method that you can apply to help get your debts in order. If your debts are so excessive that you run your budget and find that you just can't get out from underneath them, it can be handy to look into debt consolidation. And there are a lot of companies that can do this for you, but two particularly good ones are Upstart and Debt.com. Debt.com in particular, just put links to them up here. Debt.com I actually think I like even a little bit better, just because there's so much counseling and so many other tools on Debt.com as well to help you really tackle the problem of debt. It's not just consolidation. There's like psychologists you can talk to and tons of advice and tips specifically related to dealing with debt all over that website. If your debt is like not excessive and really you're just falling a tiny bit behind and starting to put things on credit cards, you might want to reconsider your credit card choices, because sometimes like in life, we literally have no choice but to go into debt, right? That's all there is. So at that point, then I think it's handy to look at how to minimize the damage that just has to be done, right? So you can also, if you're a little bit behind and the interest rates on your credit card are really high, you can look at switching to another card with possible 0% balance transfer, which will usually give you about a year at 0% interest to then pay off the debt. And if you just know for a while you're going to have to use credit cards, it's good to check the interest rates on all of your cards, because you may have like a really nice rewards card when everything was fine, and they have astronomical interest rates, and you may just be using it without thinking about it. But there are plenty of credit cards that have much lower rates that don't really have like all the perks and benefits. But if you're up against a wall and you have to use your credit cards right now, it's really worth it to consider maybe opening another one with a very low interest rate and no bells and whistles to get through this time. And the main thing really is to just be as proactive as you can about your debt, which it can totally feel overwhelming, and like you just like want to put the notices off to the side and hopefully ignore them. But the more that you can do to just address and keep organized and minimize the damage that's occurring, it can really help over time. And also, if you generally have been in pretty good standing with credit card companies and other agencies, being proactive by calling them and telling them what's happening and asking them if they can lower their interest rates or if they can give you any kind of grace period can sometimes have really good results. Okay, let's talk a little bit about retirement. Actually, I'm just gonna drink this water real quick. So retirement, I don't know about you, but I feel wildly overwhelmed about retirement all the time. And that really stuck with me until I started to dig further into retirement and like, how do people even pay for retirement? Because this seems like a massive amount of money you have to save. And I don't always make that much money. But actually, I think the more that I've studied it, like the less like panicky I feel about it. So I would encourage you to do the same. And here are some things you can start by thinking about. So a common question we get about retirement when we're trying to make our plan is, how much do you think you'll spend? Which, you know, as someone like in their mid-30s, I have no idea how much I really might spend in retirement. But if you're older, this question can be easier to answer. If you're close to retirement, you probably have a good idea of what your expenses are now and whether you want them to stay the same, or you want to travel a lot, which would be an added expense, or if you plan to downsize your house. So just sort of think about how much you spend now and if you're happy with that state of life, or how much more or less it would take to get to the life that you want. And I think when you think about retirement too, it's good to like dream a little bit, because especially if you have a long time until you get there, you have more time to try to make these dreams come true. Like when I think about how much I want to save for retirement, I don't think that like I want to be super frugal every second of retirement. I actually want to like travel and do things. So I know that that will probably cost me a little more. So I try to plan and save like I'll be able to do that. And some years I succeed, and some years that doesn't quite work out. But hopefully, and it does seem like science is on our side here. If we hit our goals most years, we will probably be able to retire okay. So a lot of people have done studies, and it seems like 70 to 90% of your current income, especially if you are closer to retirement, is about what people will spend. And if you're further away, what I find more useful is the idea of the 4% rule, which means that if you manage to get $1 million into the bank, you can live off of $40,000 a year without with it being very unlikely that you'll outlive your money that's in the bank, right? So I'm just going to drop here some retirement calculators, because really everyone is so different. Why do you keep doing this? Well, the link did it again. So just be careful on that link. But retirement is so personal and individualized, thanks Anna, that it's really helpful for you to just sit down with any of these calculators and put in your numbers of what you're saving now, what you've already saved, what you would like to, when you'd like to retire, how much you'd like to have when you retire. And these calculators are fantastic because you can notch the numbers up a little bit or notch them down. And I know I find it super motivating to be like, oh, if I put like just $20 more in every month, I could retire like 3 years earlier, especially if you have a long time frame. So I also put a few here if you'd rather use Google to look them up. If you do go the personal capital route for your net worth and your budgets, they also have a retirement planner in there that's all linked in, which is a nice thing about personal capital. Really does have a lot of tools and calculators as well. And when you've got all your accounts linked in there, it's just taking the info for you and giving you these numbers to play with. If we have friends from the UK or Europe here, HSBC and Barclays both have banks there, and they have retirement planning calculators that you can use. And then for the Americans, I'm not sure if you all know this, but you can open up your own account with Social Security, and they will show you how much you've made each year and what your projected income from Social Security is for when you retire, which is really nice, because to make $1,000 of like retirement income a month, you need, so bad at math, which is funny, like 40,000. Yeah, that would be 10, whatever. You need a lot of money in the bank to make $1,000 of retirement income, generating that based on the 4% rule. But like most of us will probably be getting like $1,000 at least from Social Security when we retire. So it's handy to factor that into your plans of how much you actually need to save, because 1 million might seem like insane and overwhelming to you. But the fact is that when you take Social Security, or if you're in another, or you have a pension, or some other countries have different equivalents of Social Security and pensions, when you factor that money into how much you need to save, the number can drop dramatically and become a lot more manageable. So for those of us who freelance and maybe don't always have access to things like 401ks, what we do have access to are IRAs. So if you have no retirement accounts, they're a really good starter account. There are traditionals or Roths. Traditional means you get the tax benefits now. So again, sort of like the HSA, if you put $6,000 into your IRA this year and you made $40,000, you would only get taxed on $34,000. A Roth means that your tax benefits wait until retirement. So if you put that $6,000 in a Roth IRA, you'd still pay $40,000 in taxes for your taxes. But in retirement, that money and all of the money that it grows to comes out tax-free. So as of 2021, you can put in $6,000 a year. And really, like, the magic of compound interest is kind of crazy. I don't know if anyone has ever explained it to you, but this graph here shows you the difference in how much you need to invest to reach $1 million based on when you start, right? Which is why I think it's a crime we don't teach financial literacy young, because it takes so much less money when you're younger to equal a lot of money in retirement than the catch up that you have to play if you start later, right? So it's like you don't even fully need to max out an IRA if you start at 20, and that's the same for the rest of your life, right? But if you start at 60, you need to put away $15,000 a year, which is just an astonishing amount of money, which is not doable, because also usually we do wind up making more money as we get older. But personally, like, the sooner you can get started, the better. There's that old saying about, like, the best time to plant a tree was like 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. It's exactly the same with your finances. So another calculator for you guys. And Anna, I can turn them into all these links into a list for you later too. This shows you the power of compound interest, right? So what I enjoy about that is that it will even show you the power of, like, you can't change how old you are now. You are however old you are. So you can't turn back time. But you can maybe save $10 or $20 more a month. And those calculators will show you over time what that difference will be. And again, I keep putting all these calculators in here because I find them super motivating. Also because I'm really bad at math, so I rely very heavily on calculators. And honestly, if math is like what puts you off personal finance, I totally understand, but it's really just basic adding and subtracting. It's not that bad most of the time. And there are so many handy calculators out there to do the math for us. So going back to that idea of goals, a lot of the other goals, you really just need to figure out what the goal amount is that you want to save and the time frame, whether it's for a house or to go back to school or to go on some awesome vacations. I think it can be very handy to open separate accounts to save for these goals. I think this for two reasons. A, because you can see how close you're getting to your goal very easily when it's in a separate account. And two, because of the bucket idea. So sometimes as freelancers, we wind up in like a tight spot, and maybe I was saving $3,000 to like go to Bora Bora or something, hopefully. But a pandemic hit, so like never mind Bora Bora, that $3,000 can become part of your emergency savings now too. And you can pull from those buckets if you need to. And if it's a long-term goal, consider investing to help hit the goal. So maybe you know someday you want to buy a house, but it's like 5-10 years from now. It can be worth like investing in just general index funds and using that money to help grow your down payment account, because historically, I want to say in the last 20 years or so, the American stock market has been averaging like 10% returns. And of course, it is the stock market, so it goes up and down, and there's always risk in that. And so much of personal finance is balancing how you feel about risk versus how much money you want to potentially make. And it's totally okay wherever you land on that spectrum to make decisions based on that. But if I had a longer term goal, I would put money into a brokerage account probably and start drawing it out a year or two before I was aiming to actually buy the house or to go to school or to go to Bora Bora. Don't know why I'm stuck on Bora Bora, probably because of that picture. All right, so just to recap on the know where you want to go, brainstorm your financial goals, set concrete savings and investing amounts using SMART goals, and use the accounts with the best tax advantages whenever possible. Okay, our third concept is spending less and earning more. Oh, I really like this quote by Charles Dickens, because it's kind of old, and like I guess personal finance really just doesn't change over time. But the Micawber principle from David Copperfield: annual income £20, annual expenditures £19, 19 shillings and 6 pence result happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20 ought and 6 result misery. I think that's like the epitome of personal finance. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about if you see that your budget is coming up short, things we can do to fix that. All right. So in the spend less category is where you get into like a lot of things about frugality. And honestly, one of the best things I think about frugality is that you are very much in control of it, because so much of personal finance is just make a decision, put some money aside and wait, and make a decision and put some money aside and wait. And it's a perpetual marathon. Especially when you're paying down debt or trying to like save up an emergency fund. But frugality and frugal tips give you a little bit more agency within that marathon, right? And also another good thing about frugality is the reduce, reuse, recycle. It's generally pretty good for the environment. So I like that part of frugality. Some things to look into. Sorry, let me catch up on my notes here. So meal planning and couponing is one way that you can generally reduce some of your expenses. And honestly, none of these are going to be massive things that are going to make a huge difference in your life. When you do your budget, another handy thing that you can use it for is to look at, like, if you're really in the red, it might be worth looking at like how you can get rid of really large expenses. Like, can you take in like housing? Can you take in a roommate? Can you move to a cheaper area? Maybe you can't, because we all kind of want to be where the theaters are, right? But also you might find little like random leaks, and the small leaks you can try to reduce with some of these tips as well. But back to meal planning. I went back to that because the first time I did my budgets, I found that like food was one of my highest items and I had to eat. So like, what could I do to just make this like a little more affordable, right? And for
Oh, I think she's just lost her connection. Let's just wait, see if she can come back on.
Whoa, sorry about that. I just like swiped left and exited the entire platform.
She's back. All good. We hear you. That. We see you.
Cool. Let's try that again. So more on meal planning. I was saying it was one of the roughest parts of my budget. And fun story, I started meal planning and couponing, and it actually did lower the number. Oh, that's cool. I'm going to send you all the links at the end and stop trying to put them in the chat, because that's what makes me keep on disappearing. So meal planning and couponing, it's really handy. Personally, I found great success in saving some money with it. And also, not going to lie, I hate it. It's actually the frugal thing that I hate to do the most. I hate sitting down and making a grocery list and looking for coupons. But when money is tight, I know that it can make the biggest difference for me and my budgets. You can also learn some DIY tips. So looking at your life, you might find that you keep having to pay to fix the same thing over and over again. So focus your DIY on that to save some money. You can look for used first on like Facebook Marketplace or FreeCycle or Craigslist. Another thing is that you can negotiate lower utilities. And there are 2 companies actually that do this as well. So if your money is really tight, I recommend that you take some time to actually call the utilities and tell them you're thinking about switching or considering other providers. And a lot of times they'll give you a break for a couple of months if you do that. If you really don't want to make those phone calls, but you want to save the money, there's actually some companies out there now called Truebill and Bill Clutters, and they will actually call and do all these negotiations for you, and then they take a portion of what you would save. So overall, you'll still save a little bit, but if you want to maximize your savings, just make the phone calls yourself. Evaluate your subscriptions, right? So I would like never tell anyone to cancel Netflix, because I feel like Netflix is actually like a really high value item. We get a lot of use out of a fairly inexpensive thing. But if you find, all right, thanks, Megan. Don't use Bill Shark. But if you find that you're using Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and all of these things, it's worth considering, like, do I need them all? And possibly like paring them down. Also, sometimes we have subscriptions that we've forgotten about entirely. So as you are reevaluating your money and doing your budget, you might find that, like, what is this expense every month that's coming up that I don't even care about or need anymore? So part of frugality is that you can give them a call and cancel it. You can also install cashback and coupon toolbars like Rakuten and Honey, which are fantastic. They take like 30 seconds to install, and then they just save you money with very little effort. Rakuten is cashback, so like you get a little pop-up when you're on a website that gives you cash back, and you put okay, and then you just get cash back every couple months. And Honey scans the web and tries to find coupon codes for you. So when you go to checkout, Honey pops up and goes, oh, we have 9 coupon codes to try for you, and it will go through and try all the coupon codes for you. And also, like, I think something that a lot of us forget sometimes is that public libraries have incredible resources for all sorts of things. So when it's safe to go to your library again, consider doing so. And then on the earn more side of things, because sometimes frugality just doesn't cut it. Some side hustles that work well for like our variable schedules in the arts are blogging and blog maintenance. If I could go back in time, I would have like taken computer science classes in college, because I will tell you, I've been blogging for almost 8 years now, and I barely know how the back end of my blog works. And all the time I have to like pay this guy, and I swear he just knows where the button is. I'm paying, and it's worth it to pay for his expertise because I don't have it. But he fixes things so quick, and I'm like, man, I just gave you like $100 to like toggle a switch, didn't I? But I didn't know where the switch was, so I had to do it. Also, freelance writing is very flexible. So if you feel like you are a pretty good writer, here are some places you can look for gigs: pro blogger jobs, blogging pro jobs, and Craigslist. Craigslist is always a little sketchy, but sometimes you need to start somewhere. So if you don't have a freelance writing portfolio, you're probably not going to get like the couple $100 gigs yet, but you might get some smaller gigs on Craigslist to build a portfolio to get you to the bigger jobs. Virtual assistant work also is another one that's often very flexible, though you want to make sure what the deal is with the people you're working for, because some of them are very task-based, so you could do those tasks anytime. Others want you there at set times, so make sure you know what you're signing up for, and you can find jobs for virtual assistants at Upwork or remote.co. Transcription is on here as well. So I've worked for Rev a couple of times, and TranscribeMe is another good one. I don't really love transcribing, but what I do love about Rev is that I like took the test, signed up, and got paid by that Friday. So if you need to be doing something to make some money come in, like transcription work can be a pretty good option, and it's very flexible. You can do it at any time that you want. Also, the longer you do it, definitely the better you get at it a little bit. And also, I don't know if TranscribeMe is the same as Rev, but they start you out with some of like the hardest to hear, roughest gig options to listen to. And then as you get better and progress, you get options. The easier to hear things are also become more available. So overall, the job gets easier and you get faster and you make more money over time. Bookkeeping is another really great job for us, because a lot of that is just data entry, and you can do that at any time. And it's fairly easy to become a bookkeeper. And a tiny one that I added here that like, it's a very small side hustle. It's called user testing. And I actually think you can do this from most countries in the world. And you evaluate websites. So it's not like constant, but it's $10 a website. It takes like 10 to 20 minutes to do. And I just log in every once in a while and check and see whether or not I like cleared, like whether or not I qualified to do any of like the tests I want to do, and make $10 here and there. Especially, and I think user testing is especially useful if you're one of the people who is like laughing at the idea of even $100 for an emergency fund. This might be a way that you can get there. Okay, I'm gonna risk it one more time and just drop in the comments a link to a blog post. That is actually 114 side hustle ideas of all sorts. So if you want to explore different ideas, those are not geared specifically towards things that I think work for us with our flexible schedules and everything. But there are a lot of ideas there. All right, so we're pretty much coming to the end here. And I just want to point out a few more places that you can look for financial resources. The Actors Fund is incredible. They are just such like an amazing wealth of knowledge. And also, if COVID-19 in particular has really messed up your life and your finances, they have a specific resource page there linking to that, to everything you can find for funding and help there. But as a whole, the Actors Fund is incredible. They also have a financial wellness section if you look there, and they do a bunch of workshops on different things. And they have they usually have like counselors you can meet with if you want more personalized guidance. They also have a lot of like health, and just the Actors Fund is amazing. Check it out. Some books that were really helpful to me: Money Girls, Smart Moves to Grow Rich is like this very silly, fluffy looking book, but it is literally the book that put me on this path. It taught me the basics of everything It's very clear and easy to read. And overall, if you still feel overwhelmed about how to build a net worth statement or to do budgets or basics of personal finance, it's a great one to look at. So The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey is also, I think he's kind of a mean man sometimes, I think, but his system is fairly good and very clear and easy to follow. And especially if you're dealing with a lot of debt, I think that it's a good system to look into. If you're trying to get in the mindset, like we were talking at the beginning, of like, can I even do this? The Wealthy Barber is phenomenal. And it's about like a barber who became wealthy. And it's a very easy read, kind of written like a parable, but teaches you a lot of like money mindsets more than like nuts and bolts. And Multiple Streams of Income by Robert Allen is a great book if you're trying to expand your income and look at different streams of, and it's where I learned that the average millionaire has 7 different streams of income. So it's just something to keep in mind. And some websites that I think generally have pretty good financial posts are Get Rich Slowly and The Penny Hoarder. Mr. Money Mustache is like super frugal. He is intensely frugal, sometimes too far frugal, but like if you're wondering how far you could go down that path, he's a good writer and it's always interesting to read. And Budgets Are Sexy is hands down my favorite like personal finance blog in the blogosphere. So like one last quick review here is the 3 concepts to remember are just to know where you are. So do that net worth statement and start figuring out your budgets. Know where you want to go. So sit down, spend some time to set your goals and figure out exactly how much you're hoping to save and when you want to have it saved by. And then try to find the best accounts to help get you there, which are different types of accounts. And some of them are really helpful in the way that they are tax advantaged in the States anyway. And then if you're falling short on the budgets or you just want to earn more, there are tons of frugality tips that you can look into to try to start spending less, and a lot of options to earning more. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I will make sure that Anna has a list of all the links, including a few that I wasn't able to send out once my computer started to act a little weird. But yeah, let me look through and see if there are any questions that I've missed. I was trying to half read the whole time, but I don't think so. So I guess we're good. Thanks for your time. Just a reminder, check out my blog. You can also get a hold of me there if you do have any questions in the future. I'd love to chat with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was amazing.
Thanks.
Awesome. We're just sure that anyone has any questions before we leave off tonight. Andrew says he's curious about touring budgets versus at-home budgets.
Do you mean like how I spend money on tour when like I have budget lines specifically for like fast food and alcohol? Or they don't change a lot, really. I would say it changes a lot because most of the time you still have your home expenses while you're on tour. But if you don't, then they've changed, in which case I would just run that budget setup again to see how I can make the most out of maybe saving money at that time. I know a lot of time when I go on tour and I'm not paying rent, I try really hard to prioritize my retirement savings and my emergency savings goals, and like making that difference and sort of putting the equivalent of a rent amount towards those has made a massive difference over time.
It's also could be a huge opportunity if you're getting per diems and things like that, right? To actually save a bit of extra cash.
It's true. Actually, if I get a per diem, I try to make my goal to live in the per diem and then save my salary to the best that I can. I cannot talk that much about becoming an LLC versus staying independent because I have not explored trying to become an LLC as an individual. Sorry, Amanda. And I wouldn't want to lead you down the wrong path because that gets very tricky with legalities. Oh. But Amanda, if you want to email me at brokeGIRLrich@gmail.com, we can talk a little more about LLCs if you want. I have credit card debt. Recommended low interest cards. Oh, you know what's funny? I think I did try to look up a few. Oh, I did recently write an entire post on credit cards on my blog, which is where you could find a list of recommended low interest credit cards if you want to go look there, Brandy. It's like in like the last 5 posts. But off the top of my head, I can't remember what the winner was. I do remember finding that the lower interest rates were not as much lower as I really hoped they would be. They're still like around 14% or so for most of them. But that is better than like 23 to 25% to even 30%, which is what a lot of rewards cards are.
Is this the one, how to pick a first credit card?
Yes. Okay.
You've got a lot of good resources.
Yeah. Do I recommend a rewards-based credit card for reimbursements if you have to do the purchasing? Oh, do you mean for the company to use a rewards-based credit card? In which case, I would ask the accounting department, because I've found some accounting departments are like, no, not at all. If you work for the kind of company where you do a bunch of purchasing and they give you a reimbursement, then heck yes, get a rewards-based credit card. Like, as long as you are sure that you can cover the amount before the interest is due, because the company will not care about the interest being due, as we all know. You still have to pay that every month. AB5. Do you track freelance expenses for tax returns? Oh, yes, absolutely. So the system that I use to track my expenses is sort of twofold. Digitally, I just have a folder in my Gmail. So if I get receipts that way, everything goes into there. And I track it on an Excel sheet as it comes in. And physically, like especially with touring, you've got a bunch of receipts for food usually and everything. I get one of those little coupon holders from like CVS or Walmart, and I categorize them and I just put all the receipts in there. And as every couple days, I'll go through and update my Excel sheet so that it doesn't overwhelm me at tax time. But then I just keep the receipts organized in the coupon thing, keep the coupon thing for a couple of years. Any other questions?
I think that's it, Mel.
All right.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much again. That was absolutely amazing. And everyone, a replay will be available on YouTube very soon. And we'll be sending an email out with that replay and the links that Mel has posted in the chat box here. And anyone she's missed, because she's going to send them to me. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mel. And everyone, bye for now. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Bye.